this session called Jamf is Building Stuff. We have Michael and Tim from Jamf that are going to take us on a more detailed look into both of those apps. So please welcome Michael and Tim.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. I thought you were going to say journey. We're going to take them on a journey. And that would have been good too, or a story. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michael Devins. I'm a product manager here at Jamf. And Tim, what do you do?
I'm a systems engineer at Jamf.
So what does that mean?
I'm the nerd part of a sales team. I go in and talk to people about the technology that the salespeople are promising.
Cool. Cool. So today we're going to cover talking about setup and reset, but I do want to take you on a bit of a journey, tell you a bit of a story, provide a bit of context around the solution. So we'll give an overview, talk about the design, we'll give some live cooking demos, talk through some use cases and examples, and give you some information about how you can go and utilize these apps in your testing and perhaps as a part of your deployments. First, though, I'm going to start with a question, sort of a philosophical question, and that is, why do you deploy devices? Everyone has a different purpose, everyone has a different type of deployment, type of end user. But there are some distinctions that we've been thinking a lot about in the formation of these two apps, these two concepts, and I kind of want to bring you through that thinking. First, there's this initial distinction. Is the device a one-to-one device, or is that a shared device? That's generally a concept that's pretty well understood. Another way to think about these devices, though, and you heard this kind of played out in the keynote this morning as well, is the difference between a primary device for an individual versus a secondary device. Is this the device that's in my pocket, or is this the device I use when I'm at work? And as a result of those distinctions, it kind of informs how I might need to provision or configure those devices. My one-to-one device in my pocket, my primary device, is personalized to me, as compared to that shared secondary device that might be customized for my role or my use case. And that distinction is sort of informing how we go about thinking about these apps in the context of provisioning. And not to state the obvious, but when I personalize a device, I've got user credentials, there's the email, my camera roll, my Instagram feed, right? That's a personalized device, a personalized experience. And ultimately, one-to-one personalized, if we could aspire for every deployment to support that model, is the most rich experience, the best experience. Of course, there's actually times where a personalized one-to-one deployment doesn't actually make as much sense, and when we need to think about it in terms of a customized deployment associated with a role or with a use case, a different way of thinking about it that's not necessarily tied to credentials or personal data. This is a really interesting category. We're seeing a lot of growth here in that secondary, customized, sort of purpose-deployed devices. And so that's why we're going to focus on that today. So again, back to this question of why deploy devices. At Jamf, you've heard us say this before. Our purpose is to empower people with technology that puts humans first. We believe we can do that best with the Apple ecosystem, and that's where we've chosen to focus. Of course, a more straightforward answer when asked the question might be, I want to do stuff, right? I have some objectives, some business process I need to facilitate. Might just be for my employees, right? Perhaps I want to use apps. There are over 2 million apps on the App Store, 2,000,002 now. That was stressful, by the way, app review. Love you guys, you're the best. There are over 2 million apps. So often, yes, people want to deploy iPhones or iPads, but it's almost as much, if not more, about the apps that you want to actually put in front of your users, whatever type of user that might be. And of course, maybe we get a little more aspirational. We say we want to create experiences. And we heard that with some of the healthcare and hospitality stories as well. These are devices for people to use. These might be guests in your hotel. They might be patients in your hospital, students in your school, employees in your workplace. And so thinking about those different dimensions. Of course, that provisioning journey starts to look kind of messy, right? Like choose your own adventure, 2 million apps, all the different configs, all the different types of roles and use cases. You might be thinking, well, that's nice, but my deployment's pretty unique. Like, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for any of this, and that's absolutely true. However, when we were working with customers through these types of problems, we did see some commonality, and from that concept, setup and reset were born. So every device initially comes out of a box. You break the shrink wrap, or you enroll it for the first time. There is a beginning. insert your use case, right? Call this fill in the blank. And then at the end of the day, at the end of someone's stay, at the end of an employee's tenure, whatever that interval is, the device might be reset or re-provisioned for a different user or use case. And when you look at it in this way, there actually is a problem we can help solve. We can take a number of these workflows and build a consistent, repeatable, scalable, empowering end users sort of workflow around the setup and the reset, and then you insert your experience in the middle. So this session is called Jamf is Building Stuff. Of course, Jamf builds Jamf Pro. We build Jamf Now, Jamf Nation, Jamf One, and there are a bunch of other projects, sort of call them skunk works type ideas, a lot of proof of concepts that we're constantly bouncing around with customers. And that actually for these apps was first born out of the tvOS space. And we find a seed of an idea and we pull that through multiple iterations, and we ran some private pilots over the last few months, getting a lot of customer validation and really refining an idea. Now, I don't mean to make that sound sophisticated or overly sophisticated. A lot of ideas don't necessarily pan out, and that's fine. But the seed of a notion of setup and reset really did have some legs, especially once we put them together. And so that's why we're introducing them as products at JNUC this year and putting them in the hands of all of the Jamf Nation customers that are deploying with Jamf Pro. So setup and reset, as I said, 2 new apps on the App Store, just published today. As of this time, they're not yet in Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, where you'll want them to be able to deploy them via MDM. That's propagating through, but that's where you'll procure those apps. Though they are on the public App Store, of course, we'll talk more about why that's not how you're going to use them. These are really about an accessory to your MDM deployment, right? And as Adam shared this morning, Jamf Setup is all about empowering that end user to make a selection of their configuration. Especially in the context of a shared device workflow, this can make a lot of sense, that sort of secondary customized device workflow. And unlike a lot of solutions that exist, this isn't premised upon a cart, an expensive piece of hardware attached to a computer, workflows over the wire, appliances, or even logins. This is all pure over the air. This is us embracing automated MDM enrollment, that zero-touch provisioning experience with this app. And as you saw, this is kind of the look and feel, and we'll talk a bit about how this is customized to your organization, to your workflow. But a really intuitive, simple workflow that we're aiming for here. And then, of course, Jamf Reset, we're aiming for a simplified reset workflow, a user-initiated wipe. Some might say a big red button. And again, no cart, no IT required. Now, of course, there are ways that you could go into settings, general, reset, erase all content in settings, and that's a really simple flow, right? Not necessarily, especially for someone that's not familiar with the device. That's really not a sustainable workflow to be able to empower an end user to reset a device. Jamf Reset gives us home button or home screen access to that device reset workflow. And yes, we're talking about erasing a device. So often we get in this mindset of, I need to get devices under management. I need to keep them under management. I don't ever want to see them go. There's a bit of a boomerang effect that you've seen Jamf embrace, first with our healthcare listener story, where we're wiping devices on a regular basis because we know they're going to come right back in. And really, wiping is important because that's the only way we have to guarantee that all personally identifiable information is wiped off a device, from Apple IDs to your Netflix accounts to the camera roll, et cetera. And so we're embracing this notion to unlock new kinds of workflows while preserving that native Apple experience that doesn't depend upon wrappers or diluted experiences or limitations on the experience. And this is what Reset looks like. Again, we'll talk about how that can be customized. Before we talk about the apps themselves, I want to give a bit of color and context around the design of the solution, sort of the spirit of how these apps can work. So it's predicated first on inventory. Based upon inventory of a device, we can do things to it, right? Jamf Setup specifically is controlling a mobile device extension attribute. Now, first, anyone that's not familiar, what's a mobile device extension attribute? It's simply a custom piece of inventory. So unlike a serial number or a building or a location or a user ID, something that might be programmatically entered, we can completely customize this inventory field. So this can be our setup extension attribute. And that is what is going to drive the configuration of this device. And sort of the premise here then is that you'll have a number of different groups, a number of different smart groups driven off of that extension attribute. So in addition to saying, I've got all of my devices, some things I'll apply configurations to at the sort of population level to say, all of my devices need these things. I'll then have discrete smart groups based on the role. So if the role is red, these are the apps or settings or wallpaper, et cetera. If the role is blue, those configurations look different. And we'll talk about how we're sort of designing that solution to be as seamless and fluid as possible. So first with this all devices group, the concept here is maybe that you're using scoping criteria like pre-stage equals, a really simple way to say every device that enrolls through this MDM server is a part of my setup device group. Whatever that criteria looks like, you can add layers to that. Based on all of the testing that we've done, the best experiences we can create are derived when we scope all of the apps to all the devices. So you think of the sum of the experience that you want to create. If it's 3 different roles, each role might use different apps. Install the sum of those apps for all 3 roles to the device group itself. And we're using device-based app licensing, so there's no user pop-ups, it's all seamless. And this allows us to sort of cache or warm those devices with the right apps. Importantly also, iOS doesn't have many examples of this, but home screen layout is an example of an iOS configuration profile where it can only handle one of them. So in addition to saying scope all of the apps to all the devices, I'll make one sum of all of the home screen ordering that I want to create onto that device. So in my red-blue analogy, if you track with me here, the concept is I've installed all of the apps on all of the devices, and I've ordered them depending on which configuration is selected. This concept of scope the sum of the apps, it really is a strong parallel to the shared iPad, the personalized learning experience that Apple's created with shared iPad, where you scope all the appropriate apps depending on which user you might be serving. Same sort of concept holds up here. And then, of course, depending on the selection made through Jamf Setup, that role might switch between configurations. And as that extension attribute is updated, we can do some things. We can automate the wallpaper changing, so you at quick glance, even from the lock screen, can see that's a red iPad, that's a blue iPad, it's a red iPhone, that's a blue iPhone, right? And when you follow through this notion of scoping all the apps to all the devices, we're using restrictions, specifically the ability to show and hide applications, to really quickly on the fly create a really fluid experience of saying you only get to see these apps or you only get to see those apps. So in a simple concept you'll see here illustrated in a moment, one state is sort of awaiting a selection, and in that state I might just put setup on the dock and you don't see anything else. It's a really obvious icon. We designed it to be super user intuitive and did some testing to make sure the design and the contrast for accessibility, all of those things were right, but it's just begging to be tapped and you make your selection. Then depending on your selection, you'll see the red apps or the blue apps or the orange apps, et cetera. And that is an instant switch between. We're not waiting for apps to then start installing, right? So we can kind of do that on the fly, really quick turnaround. Some tips as you're starting to build out this workflow. And some of this I won't belabor, but we're talking about a lot of smart groups. We're talking about a lot of config profiles unique to each of those smart groups. So as with everything in Jamf Pro, organization is really important. But just thinking about how you can really purposefully organize those dependencies so that you don't inadvertently lose one piece and cause that experience to be interrupted. As I said, one home screen layout on iOS, and doing that at the device level avoids any conflicts of trying to install 2 at once. Getting the apps there right away ensures that they're on there prior to user making a selection so that you can have a more seamless experience. And then we can show or hide those based upon the user selection, change the wallpaper based upon a user selection. And just one other tip, at least based on current iOS behavior, you'll notice that in recent iOS versions, some system apps don't actually come pre-installed on an iOS device anymore. Some, you see tips installing, you see weather installing, right? An app in that installing state doesn't necessarily always respect the show only setup restriction. So in addition to saying show only red apps or show only blue apps, if you're doing a pre-stage enrollment, an automated MDM enrollment, you can explicitly say don't show tips, don't show weather, don't show mail. And then as those are installing, you don't get a gray progress bar that then disappears once it's installed. So it's a nuance that's not super important, but if you're truly doing a wipe re-provision workflow, explicitly hiding some of those system apps ensures that you're not seeing those install only to have them disappear. Our belief is that there are a lot of ways to use these apps, but we do really have an opportunity to introduce a new paradigm in a shared deployment model, especially because we're not just talking about one platform. We're not just talking about iPad. We're talking about iPhone and iPod Touch. And I do want to point out, like, there's a really, really important distinction. We're not trying to say, this is good, the personalized learning experience with Apple's shared iPad in education. That's great as well. The distinction really comes back to that personalized versus customized. Comes back to, is this a personalized learning device, or is this a secondary device I'm using for some function? And we're able to offer this sort of in an industry-agnostic fashion. So you don't necessarily need to be in education. You don't require Apple IDs. This might be a nice alternative, or if you want to bring that to iPhone or iPod Touch, it's a nice extension of that concept. A lot of the same inspiration, but just a different sort of deployment workflow. So with that background, we're going to get into some of the tech. I'm going to turn it over to Tim. He's going to talk to you a little bit more, and then I'll come back and bring it home. But you want to dive into some of the tech now, Tim?
Yeah, it's time for the
Cool.
nerd stuff.
Nerd stuff. Let's go.
Cool. So app config community. We are big believers in the mobileappconfig.org. We're huge. We use it a lot. We use it in self-service. Hopefully everybody here is using self-service. So when you deploy it, we've got that XML file that you've got on the back end that's actually going to help you configure what it wants to look like. Lots of industries use it. Salesforce uses it. Epic uses it in Rover, Canto, Haiku, the apps that are really important in the healthcare world. To be able to customize your server setting, to be able to make some very specific, very detailed things to make it customized for your particular company. And we really do fully embrace the whole power of app config. We're big believers in it. I'm just going to get over here so I can see better. With app config, though, we can do some other cool stuff, too. Not just define the server, not just define what it is it actually needs to do to function, but we can do some stuff that makes it look and feel more like your app, more like it's coming from your company, more like so that when your customers or your students open this thing up, it looks like it's coming from you. It doesn't look like it's coming from us, necessarily, which is going to just help instill some trust in the technology and let them be able to feel more like they're going to be able to use it more easily. So this is some of the stuff that we can do. This is basically it's a key string combo. This is the XML file that's going to sit in the app config section. So
We've got extensive documentation, so you don't need to try and type this off the screen. It is available, and we'll share that as well, but context and illustration, but like the professor's going to give you the keynote slide sort of thing. You don't need to write these down. I wouldn't recommend trying.
Yeah, and they're going to be very different. So, but we need something to function. We need a way to call the API call. We need something to be able to make it access our Jamf Pro instance. So everything has to have that. It's going to look really familiar to your self-service ones. But in addition to that, we can do some really cool stuff. Oh, I want to talk about this one first. Let's talk about this one first. Your extension attribute. Michael talked about it earlier. You have to define it. You have to create one. I'm really OCD, so mine's called Jamf Setup Choice. So that when I create my smart group, it says Jamf Setup Choice is whatever that extension attribute I am defining in my array, which I'll talk about in a second. But you can call it whatever you want. It's totally customizable. We're big believers in that, too. And this is the array. I'm going to show this in a minute when we, as Michael says, start running with scissors, and I'm going to do a live demo. But this is all of your choices. Your insert option 1 here can be anything you want it to be. Anything that's in your particular vernacular or your particular industry so that it looks and feels familiar to your particular end user. And all that's doing is it's making an extension attribute change through the API saying, all right, this device picked this button, so now that extension attribute is this, which means it's going to fall into that smart group, which you can use for scoping. Bada bing. You've got a newly re-provisioned device, just pretty much as simple as that. We can do all sorts of cool stuff with it. I'm going to show you in greater detail here in a moment. The header image, the title image, all the text that you can see on the screen is completely customizable, all within that XML. You just change that value to whatever it is you want it to be, and it will reflect pretty fast. In fact, you can make a change more or less real time, and it will reflect on the devices that already have the app deployed.
If there were like a prize for like who is going all in on app config, I mean, I'm not going to say we'd win it, but we'd be in contention because we kind of went all out.
Yeah.
Not to make it overwhelming, but just to illustrate the potential of giving you a blank canvas and then you create your experience. A lot of these are optional, but it really gives you a lot of control, which you'll see, and I just want to point that out.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely right. And hopefully, as we start using it and we get more feedback from you guys, we're big believers in listening to Jamf Nation as well. If there's functionality, there's always feature requests. And since it's an actual product, we can actually listen to that, which is also really exciting. These are some basic looks. The one on the right here, screen right, is your basic make a selection. There's nothing really filled in. And then the one on the left, screen left, is some ideas about how we can do stuff. I've actually been using it in my demos. I talk to customers a lot. I want to show what, maybe I'm talking to a retail opportunity or maybe I'm talking to a hotel. I can actually just push on my custom setup app that I have on my device. It'll change the look of my device so that I can be talking to the customers without having to re-provision it. It's a really flexible tool. And that flexible tool is one I'm going to show you right now. This is the exciting part. Thank you, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is my iPad. It's right here. As you can see, we've only got 2 apps on here, 3 if you count settings. Big green one says go. That's our setup app. Big red one is stop. That's our reset app. So when I hit this button, we're going to see the education type experience. English cart, science cart, math cart. I want to emphasize that this is not a shared iPad. We're not trying to compete or enter into that space with Apple. Apple has a very good solution for that with managed Apple IDs and shared iPads. That's not what this is. This is just, well, imagine you've got an AV guy in a school and you want to wheel a cart in for a particular use case and then wheel it into another classroom and wheel it into another classroom. And then they just use it, and when they're done, they can either reset it if they want to, or you can just make another room, make another choice, which I'll actually show you. So I'm going to pick English cart. And just as a reminder, we've got nothing right here. So I'm going to pick English cart and hit submit. It is now doing a call to the API saying now you're an English cart, get a little success message there, and then when I back out of the app, it looks like that. Pretty quick. It's pretty slick. I'm really happy with it. And if you make a mistake, you can go, all right, no, let's not do that. Let's actually make this a science cart. Hit submit. Now it's doing that same exact call, overwriting that thing to a different one, and you back out, and it should do science cart. Pretty fast. Yeah, cool. So we should show the cool one. So I'm going to show you one more device, the one I have in my back pocket, that has a little bit more of a built-out thing. I have a big back pocket. Well, it's an iPad mini. All right, I'm going to unplug this guy and plug this guy in. Hot swapping with QuickTime. We are pros.
Can't imagine what could go wrong.
No, nothing probably.
I lose my mouse. That's what could go wrong.
There it is. So this is a little bit more built out. I'm going to show a couple more workflows, and we're going to just try to race it. We're not going to stop and explain how things are working. I'm going to hit the button. I'm going to exit out of the app, and we're going to see exactly how fast this actually happens. Because remember, all it's doing is hiding and not having apps. There's not that much stuff that has to be transferred. If we were uninstalling and reinstalling apps, that might be a bit of a bummer. Might be good if you've got a caching thing or if you need to make that happen. But this is really fast. All right, so we've got nothing on here. It's a little bit more built out. This is our retail experience. You can see that I've changed the color of the background. That logo at top supports transparencies. So if you have a transparency for your logo, plop it on there and it'll actually just match the background. That's a pretty cool discovery. All right, so big switch to Store Associate. And just as a reminder, we don't have anything there. So I'm going to hit Store Associate. I'm going to hit Select. I'm going to back out. We'll just see how quick it happens. Hit Select and then back out. And should, if all is right and fair in the world, yeah, about that fast. Considering I'm on hotel Wi-Fi or convention Wi-Fi, and considering that everybody here is probably on the network, and it happens that quickly, even if you're in a retail store, even if you don't have the best bandwidth, you're going to experience something that is pretty understandably good for your particular customers. That was a really crappy sentence,
really,
but I got to the end of it. I didn't think
awesomely
I was going to get to the end of it, but I made it, yes. So now I'll show a little bit something else. I actually threw this at the very bottom. Oh, this is another pro tip. I left a bunch of these arrays blank in the XML, and this is my null state. So if I want to go back to a freshly provisioned, if I wanted to just go back to null, I can make a selection and it'll go back to that state. It's just another smart group that says.
That's your SE demo hat on. You're just getting yourself shortcuts left and right.
Yeah, I wanted to get to the people as quick as possible. And then this one, all apps, is when I don't want this to be my demo device anymore. I want this to be my actual device. So when I hit all apps, and I'm going to back out again really quick again. We're going to race this thing. Back out. It should start very quickly. It has now unscoped the restrictions. It's unscoped the home screen layout. It's unscoped everything, and it just starts doing it that quick. I got one more thing.
Yeah.
Hey,
cool.
thanks. This guy here kiosk mode. It has to be my last thing because as soon as I do this, if it works, I won't be able to use this thing anymore. Kiosk mode.
There's no if it works. Come on. Where's your confidence?
Trust the technology. I'm an SE. I don't trust anything until I see it work. We're going to hit kiosk mode, and what should happen is it should restrict everything except for Kiosk Pro, and then it should launch Kiosk Pro and put it in single app mode, and then I won't be able to get out. The story there would be you'd be able to maybe reprovision a device without IT in your store or on your campus. IT could just open a box, pick what it's going to be, and make it happen. Or somebody's dropped an iPad, and now you need another POC, you need another point of sale to go out on the floor so that you're not losing sales. You actually can continue your business by being able to hit that button and make it happen. So this is a bit of a longer workflow because there's many cascading steps, but this is what it looks like now. And we're going to hit kiosk mode and hit select, and then I'm going to back out of this thing. And then it should start restricting things pretty quickly, down to Kiosk Pro, and in a second it should launch Kiosk Pro, and then there it goes. Come on, baby, you can do it. We're just going to put this down and hope.
Nice wallpaper.
Hey, thanks, man. Didn't you make that?
I did.
Yeah.
That wasn't meant to be a self-compliment.
Well, boo. All right, well, there
See,
you go.
you jinxed it.
I did.
Or I jinxed it.
Somebody jinxed it. Anyway.
We're just going to wait until it works.
Yeah, so you're just stuck here. Any questions?
The one thing that I want to point out too, and if single app mode kicks in, it's just going to kick in, and then this part of my conversation won't matter. But the you picked, there's actually a variable in there. So based on whatever selection that the user made in the array, that is shown in the confirmation screen as well. So you get that affirmation that you made this selection, and it's dynamic based upon what they selected on the previous screen.
I just should point out, this is reset. It wipes the device. That's what it does. It works on the same exact XML file. It's the same exact workflow. You can still change the header. You can change the background. It supports transparencies. You can change the language. You can change the color of the button. If you don't want the button to be a big red button, you can make that big red button be a big blue button, and it will still wipe the device. There is a flag in there for restart if you want to just restart it, which is what I have it set to, so that people don't
testing.
wipe my device. Exactly.
Or demo.
Yeah,
still in single app mode, so I'm a little disappointed in you.
Sorry, man.
I mean the tech.
Whatever.
The other thing I'll point out about the reset is we'll also automatically suppress the, after a complete device erase, we'll suppress the proximity setup. So, you know, especially a guest user like in your store or your hotel or your hospital, they're not going to have your Wi-Fi credentials. Let's not prompt them to set up from a nearby device. Let's just let them pick Wi-Fi and go if that's in fact a wipe device. And we can actually, via a flag on the MDM wipe command, we can suppress that proximity setup screen so that you're just getting back into a reconfigured state as quickly as possible.
The default is suppressing, right?
The behavior is suppressing, and we may expose an app config key to turn it on if you have a use case. Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's get back to the...
Cool. So let's go back. So especially the last demo, which you can just imagine how amazing that kiosk would have looked.
Would have been so cool.
Would have been so cool. This isn't just about shared device, right? We're not just trying to replicate, you know, shared iPad. There are a number of different provisioning activities that relate to a setup workflow or a reset workflow that you might use just one app or the other. So I don't mean to say they're always used together, though really cool when you do. But when you break these down, there's that notion of initial config. Like I drop ship 10 iPads to a store, and I get to just make that initial selection as someone in the store who knows what I need. And it's not about having made a decision in central IT, mapping a spreadsheet to serial numbers, and hoping that all the boxes end up in the right place. So I can just say, this one's that role, and we're ready to go. Break fix, I need to take my floater device, put it into kiosk mode. It's now provisioned and set to go. So it just gives you a different sort of initial config workflow. Again, not tied to user credentials, but tied to that use case or that function. There's another interesting workflow, and you heard a little bit of this discussed in the context of the healthcare example this morning, where this notion of a multi-persona shared device where different roles might kind of on the fly do some switching, as Tim showed. I want to change my selection and just sort of flip between configs. That education example actually is a really interesting one. A lot of schools will have a cart that serves a number of different use cases, English, math, science. And then when students are presented with this device, they're wading through the English and the math apps just to find the science apps. You can provide all of those things in sort of a standardized, customized deployment, but when we use setup, we can actually make that a more succinct experience, take some of the friction or confusion out, give a consistent view of just the science apps or just the math apps, and you can on the fly switch between those. That notion of a multi-persona shared device. And because we're not necessarily dealing with personal and identifiable information, in a lot of these workflows, we don't actually need to use reset. You can, but if you don't want to have to reinstall the apps, go back through automated MDM enrollment, maybe you're just doing this on-the-fly swapping and reset isn't even a part of your solution. This morning we also heard about how whether it's because an automated workflow for wiping a device isn't available, not every device has a system of record that I can tie into for automation, or maybe because I don't want to wait till I leave and get discharged and trust that my device is wiped because I might have just been accessing personal information on there. Empowering the end user to say, I had a personal experience with the iPad in my hospital room, but I want to erase it. I want that confidence. Gives them that option. And if that's done, then the automated wipe doesn't need to process. We can recognize that the device has already been wiped, and so it fits into that model as well. And of course, that notion of just turn it off and on again, right? Sometimes in a lot of these workflows, something's funky, you don't know why. Just wipe it and start over and just give users a really simple way to do that. Not everything fits everywhere, but we do believe that independent of together shared workflows with setup and reset, each app individually offers some unique provisioning assistance as well. Again, zooming back out, we're talking about empowering people with technology that puts humans first. We want to give that native Apple experience to users. We want to solve some of these provisioning milestones, and we believe that with setup and reset, we can solve a number of new iOS provisioning workflows. We can help you reduce friction. We can help you increase your efficiency. We can help you scale your deployments in a way that maybe wasn't possible before. So these apps just hit the App Store today. As I said half an hour ago, they hadn't propagated through to Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager, though I expect they will shortly. So you can procure those volume licenses and deploy them through Jamf Pro. It is a universal app, so iPhone, iPad. Let's not forget about iPod Touch like I did when I made this slide. And then this app requires Jamf Pro, but it's not a separate thing you need to buy. It's a free app. It's something that we believe can help fortify and enhance that mobile device provisioning workflow built on the API is foundational to Jamf Pro. So with that, that's what we had to share. Let's do some questions. I think Paul is going to run around with a microphone. Hands are already flying up. This is awesome.
And Jen back there.
Ooh, Jen back there. They're going to have to battle. We'll start up front.
At some point, maybe bring this to macOS.
At some point, bring this to macOS. Maybe. Do you have a specific workflow in mind? It's sort of a different paradigm.
We're in a workflow in the event technology space, and so turning macOS and iOS devices obviously now, but being able to turn macOS devices around quickly for different events, let's say, in a rental environment.
Cool, yeah, some different dynamics, but I'd love to chat after a little more to see what your workflow is, if something like this might fit. So find me after. Jen, you have someone? Oh, I was trying to be democratic, but I guess we're just going to stick with Paul.
The proximity setup feature, how long does that persist? If a device is powered up and back on, is it still honored?
Yeah, so it's a unique thing that we just did a full device wipe and yet some bit persists. Introduced in iOS 11.3, we can add a flag to the MDM wipe command, and then on that device's next boot, so however long later that happens, the device will not show that proximity setup. I could re-wipe it without that flag, and then it would show the next time, but it applies to the next, factory reset boot.
Okay. And is it Jamf Pro version sensitive?
Not explicitly. We haven't tested earlier than version 10, but there's no functionality dependent upon 10.8 or 10.9. There might be some various performance enhancements with the most up-to-date software, but on the whole, no, there's not a minimum requirement. Jen?
You sort of answered my question already, yeah, with the iOS requirements, if it's just 12 specifically, or if it's 10, 11, or where it's got to be on. And then sort of with the first question too, in education, I have like staff checkouts. I think of macOS, I think would be really helpful for that reset and the setup options for those too. So
yeah, I'd love to chat with you more after. Yeah. There are some distinct advantages we have on iOS to create this kind of experience, especially with the sort of the controlled and sandbox nature of those devices. So understanding more about the macOS, be super interested. We haven't spent much time thinking about it at this point. Paul?
Any thought on like passcode for some of the setup options like on a point of sale if you want to give a manager setup, and only they can select that?
Yeah, that's a super good question. It's something that came out of our pilot customer group. So I kind of alluded, we've had customers using these apps for several months. The initial premise of this is it's not about trying to gate access, but rather about simplify the customization. We did hear that notion of, it's not quite about user credentials, but maybe only certain people could go back into setup and reassign to a different role. We want to be careful that at this point we're not gating access, that the apps themselves still have logins, and that's generally how access would be gated. But it's an interesting question, and it's feedback we've got around how to set a passcode for making a new selection and setup. So as we're collecting feedback, that's one we've already heard, but would love to throw a Jamf Nation feature request and we could get some votes on it. But that's something that's come up.
Yeah, it's one of the things I heard most talking to potential happy customers about this was that asking for a flag specifically for an array, like just with one point in the array or the whole app or whatever, but it was certainly a very common request that we definitely like.
Cool.
So on a question on the reset, does it have to communicate back? We'd like to use it for kiosk mode, but we have a problem where the Wi-Fi drops.
Yeah, so it's a good question. When you hit reset, it is an API call back to Jamf Pro to say wipe this device. There's no local API on iOS available to us to say wipe this device that I'm on. So like if you download reset from the App Store, you can't wipe your own device, right? It needs to be managed from Jamf Pro. So you can try, it won't work. You'll get a lovely error message saying it's missing its app config.
Which is customizable, by the way, the error message.
Yeah, of course it is. So it does require a network connection, and we are looking at some of the feedback we got too was don't let me proceed through a workflow if the device doesn't have an active network connection. So how could we surface that error before you try to do some task? Those are some of the things that we can continue to iterate through and refine. But it is Jamf Pro sending a wipe, so it does need to push that up. And then Jamf Pro will wipe the device back down.
Yeah, so based on the based on the setup, is there any attribute that changes that reports back that I can see a report of, what key, what mode did they put it in, and a reporting feature on that?
Over time, not natively. So there is an inventory field. What is yours called?
My inventory field
Yeah,
or Jamf setup choice?
Jamf setup choice.
Yeah.
So at any moment, you could look at your population of devices and see what percentage of them are in, one extension attribute versus another. So you could look at that distribution. I suppose via device history, we could see on a device level which roles were selected or swapped between. But as far as like an overtime logging to see which roles are selected most frequently, not straight away without a little bit of data collection and retention. Is that speaking to your question, or are you thinking about it from a different way?
More as in, let's say I have 100 devices, 50 users put it on one, 50, like 20 users on the other. Can I see what they chose, as far as the setup option?
Yeah, so that is a persistent inventory field. So you'd be able to look at the sum of the devices and say how many have extension attribute, this value versus extension attribute that value. That is persistent on the device record. Until it's changed to something else or reset at enrollment.
Even putting your smart group in your dashboard that says this smart group is the Jamf setup choice is this thing, and you can see your population
in
pretty
each
easily.
of those. Yeah, because the premise is it falls into one of those X number of smart groups, so the count of each of those smart groups would be representative of the count of current state. Up front.
Can you do nested arrays?
No. We heard the request. Again, throw it on Jamf Nation. There definitely are use cases we've heard around both, like what's the right level of disclosure? So what floor are you on, then what section are you in, or what location are you in, now what role are you in? At this point, it's a single array. Definitely throw a feature request out there. We can take a look at that.
And strings are also not supported. To be able to,
Sure.
to be able to, what's the input?
Oh, yeah, it's not user definable. So it's picking from an array. It's not entering a value.
Right.
Not entering a custom value. Yeah. But good question.
What's the difference between using Jamf Reset versus going into the device and just erase all contents and settings?
42. So there are a couple important reasons why reset would be preferred from an IT perspective over doing a local device wipe. There's the user friction piece of, all you need to do is just go to Settings, then General, then Reset, then Erase All Content Settings, then Confirm. That's all. There is no step 7. And if someone's not familiar with iOS, that actually is a very foreign journey. Just not really one that you'd want to put someone down, especially a one-time use sort of situation. So that point aside, there are a couple important aspects of MDM being the one to wipe the device. One we heard is being able to inform and suppress that proximity setup on next boot. The other is the ability to have a log of that device wipe. You actually have a record of every time that device is wiped. The third is if you wipe a device locally, MDM doesn't necessarily know. And so the device is still in a mid-managed state. We haven't necessarily cleared the extension attribute. We haven't reset the install application queues. We haven't necessarily recalculated scopes. You might come as a new enrollment, and Jamf Pro thinks you are already enrolled and configured, and that could lead to a really dysfunctional initial enrollment. Call that a deficiency on the way we handle these permutations. It's a limitation of just when you unmanage a device, when you unmanage a device by way of locally resetting it, MDM is not informed of that action. And so it just leaves you in a spot that we're not expecting. So for all of those reasons, and maybe more, are there other reasons that it's better?
In the healthcare world, if you are medicated, a big red button's a heck of a lot easier than opening the settings app and trying to find your way there.
Got it.
Yeah.
Hi, so in your 2 role A and role B, what if there were applications common to both that left data behind? Almost like Safari history. If you work in an environment that wants those roles to have.
That data is persistent between those switches. So as you switch, since all it's doing is hiding and not hiding apps, the only way to get around that would be to uninstall it or wipe the device with reset. So those kind of workflows are not really recommended at this point. If you have personal information on there, maybe this isn't the best option for your particular use case.
Yeah, we've talked to customers around what are the criteria for, it's more of a when would you need to use reset, right? And if it's not one of these situations, then maybe you can get away without it. If you're ever exposing the camera, we can't purge just the camera roll. If you're exposing something like a browser, we can't purge just browser history. If you're doing sign-ins that are long-lived, we can't sign you out of Netflix or we can't sign you out of your iTunes account or your iCloud account. So for some of those persistent activities, that's a situation where reset would probably be a good thing to use as a part of your workflow. It gets more into that personalized workflow, which is fine, but as soon as it's personalized, we can't say, delete this data and leave everything else. We don't quite have that granular control over the personal data segment of the sandbox, and so that's where reset would be a part of the workflow. So whether that works for you or not, but that's sort of the current state.
But you said there may have been a case where you can uninstall in between uses certain apps.
If your data lives in that app and you have tested the heck out of that and you want to go through the process of making a selection which then unscopes that app will go away when you make that selection.
But Safari is, there's no way to force it into private browsing mode or anything
so you'd
like
have
that.
to,
So Safari's the gotcha, but a simple app can be done
with
an uninstall and install. Okay,
for the recording and for posterity, this is me just saying I don't know, but removing an app sometimes still leaves behind the sandbox of the user data, so I just don't know if an uninstall and reinstall of the app purges the sandbox or not. I know we have some controls to prevent data from being backed up to iCloud, but I just don't know the state of that device when personal data in an app is removed, and then app is reinstalled. When I delete an app and then re-download it on my personal device, it still remembers some of my data, so I know that sometimes that data persists. I haven't tested that specifically in an MDM-driven workflow, so the behavior may be different. But
very much depends on the app.
I'll just couch that. Yeah, maybe we can just use that as a route. It just depends.
It does just
the
depend.
classic MBA answer. So testing, but that would just be more to consider.
I hate to cut this short. We're going to have time for one more, but you guys will
we'll be
around for questions.
There's an interactive lab, we should say, where you're going to be able to get your hands on this. Adam, it's at 4 o'clock, right? 4 p.m. today, the interactive lab where you can actually touch these builds and actually get and play with them and see how fast they are when a whole bunch of people are doing them simultaneously, which should be really exciting.
What are your thoughts on bringing these apps to tvOS in the future?
Dean thinks it's a great idea.
Dean thinks it's a great idea.
We've been discussing it, especially in the hospitality space. It makes a lot of sense for reset and even for setup. One of the proof of concepts that inspired setup was actually a tvOS app saying, tell me where you are. I don't want to manage a spreadsheet. Just install it and then phone home and say I'm in room 201. So that setup concept holds up, but no specific plans. But a Jamf Nation feature request would be a great way to gauge that. This gentleman was patient and attempted to ask a question a few times, so Paul, I'm going to override you and take one last question. Bonus, it better be good.
Okay, what's the difference between your reset and your wipe that's already on Jamf?
So it is hitting that erase device MDM command. So this is offering an end user the ability via a really simple interface on an end user device for Jamf Pro to know that we should send an MDM wipe command. So that's exactly what we're using, but exposing it in a different place.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank
that
you.
lab is at 4. Hope to see a lot of you there.
Thank you.